The story starts with a monologue from a troubled hospitalized boy who had always been into games ever since he was a kid, as he was always in the hospital. Games had become a major part of his life, and he would get super frustrated whenever he lost, usually blaming the game itself. Eventually, he got too tired of the repetitive gaming, throwing his Nintendo Switch on the bed, realizing that games were simply not fun anymore, much like real life. He noticed that almost every genre of gaming such as AOS RPG and FPS games was now filled with bland releases each year. Almost everything about them was the same repetitive worlds and copied stories. People on the internet agreed with him. As he lay in the hospital bed, he wondered if he would ever find an exciting and original game to play again. Then, like a miracle in the making, he found Dungeon and Stone, a game that immediately caught his attention. It was a beautiful RPG indie game with gorgeous 2D pixel art that was hard to come by these days. The boy researched it and found out that it was only available in English, while looking like a type of game he would not play. Despite his doubts, he booted it up, intrigued by the free game that captured his attention. Upon launching, he had to choose a class from a bunch of regular ones like human and dwarf to some weird ones like furry and fairy. Thinking he wouldn't play for long, he randomly clicked on Barbarian, just for the hell of it. However, as he got thrown into the game, he realized it was unlike anything he had played in a while, as it was a vertical scroll game. It felt like a casual time killer at first, but the more he played, the more he understood about the game. Suddenly, he checked the time and realized it was already 10 p.m. and that he had spent the entire day on the game. He was hooked and completely head over heels for this game. He was surprised by how fun it was. Dungeon and Stone had several charms that could either make or break the gameplay loop for different players. First of all, it was mandatory to have an NPC character on your team for gameplay, and the permanent death system meant starting over if you died. While having fun at first, the game got difficult, and losing progress several times became frustrating. He would scream and shout in the patient room, constantly apologizing to the staff for being so loud while being scolded for making too much noise in the patient's room. Yet, he was determined to beat the game at any cost. But it turned out that Dungeon and Stone was such a failed game that there were no tutorials in either English or Korean as he tried his best to research ways to beat the game. Time flew by. He played while in the hospital, even after being drafted to be a public service worker till he was released, going to university and interviews, graduating, and even now, working at a prestigious company. Throughout the years, he kept trying to beat the game, experimenting with different classes, dying, and reaching higher levels, but never becoming consistently great at it as he kept dying with each new try at the game. Finally, 9 years had passed, and he reached the final boss room, the Gates of the Abyss, ecstatic that no one else had reached this point. Filled with joy, he shouts out loud if any bastard saw where he was and whether anyone else had gotten to the same point as him. Tears began to swell up in his eyes as he recounted that for the past 9 years, he had sacrificed his 20s for this game and to finally reach this point. A window appears asking him if he wanted to enter the boss room. Without hesitation, he clicked the yes button, despite another window appearing with a warning that he might never come back. But our Giga Chad dude immediately pressed yes, just like how we click I agree on every terms and conditions without even reading the terms and conditions. He takes note of the warning but thought that it was simply meant to make the final boss even more ominous. The loading screen appeared, and thoughts rushed through his head. He knew he probably wouldn't beat the boss on his first try, so he wanted to gather as much information as possible for the first battle. His mind wandered, pondering the boss's attack patterns, attributes, and ultimate abilities. Yet, there was a glimmer of confidence, imagining what it would be like to defeat the boss on his first attempt. As the loading finished, a window pops up to inform him that he had reached the abyss, but another window appears telling him that the tutorial was complete, but he noticed that the words tutorial complete was in Korean text on the screen, confusing him as he thought it only supported English while grabbing onto his monitor. This confusion turned to anger as he remembered the 9 years of tirelessly learning English. A prompt appeared, indicating that the user check had completed, leading to a burst of bright light emanating from his 2 monitors. Our hero was shocked as the light nearly blinded him, and he felt a surge of pain oozing through his body as a window appears saying that a strong ray of light poured out and with a pain that burned through my body. He questioned everything about life as the transmission started. The room became empty, with only his computer screen shining brightly. He lost consciousness but woke up to a loud voice congratulating some young warriors. A man's voice told them they would leave the sacred place. Confused, he wondered who was speaking. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the man telling them they would become proper warriors. He was surrounded by young barbarian warriors, while an old chieftain was giving a speech. He couldn't believe it. An unreal world was in front of him, with torches instead of LED lights, buffed lords made up of barbarians all around, and an old weird chieftain giving a speech. The old man shouts at them to pick a weapon that best fit them, leaving the protagonist wondering what he meant. He also questioned how he could understand their unique language, as he was certain he had never heard it before. He wondered why he was in this world in the first place. However, he calmed himself, thinking of it as the intro to a very difficult game. He questions himself on what he needed to do first. He knew he must understand what was going on first and gather information. He looked at his body and was taken by surprise, realizing he was made of pure muscle with rough hands and covered in tattoos. While staring at his hand that he could move freely, he had become a giga chad of a barbarian that looked like Hercules of the Greek lore in this world. His face was filled with confusion as he questioned if this transformation was truly him. The old chieftain started calling people to pick their weapons, starting with Vanon's third son, Carrick. The boy named Carrick walked up to the old chieftain and looked around. He grips onto a handle of a weapon and decided on choosing a double-sided axe, a choice the chieftain respected as he yells out that it was a great choice. He then announces that he was giving him the title of warrior. The chieftain calls forth Feneline's second daughter, who was a woman named Einar, to step forth, which sparked a familiar feeling in our hero. Other young warriors began to choose their own weapons. A female barbarian had selected a sword while another barbarian selected a spear as his weapon of choice. The chieftain praises them for their choices and stated that they had a bright future while being acknowledged as a warrior. As the chieftain gave them the blessing of Rathtonia, a probable deity for the barbarians, our hero realized something shocking. He had been thrown into the world of Dungeon in Stone. When he had chosen Barbarian earlier in the game, and now he had become his character, questioning reality itself at the astonishing turn of events. As he wondered how this could have happened, a young braided man next to him expressed anguish and confusion about why he was there. The young braided man muttered the words Dungeon in Stone, which captures our Giga Chad's attention. With his confused eyes and scared expression, our hero notices that he was different from the other barbarians, making he suspect that he might not be the only player who entered the game. Suddenly, the chieftain screamed, asking who just opened their mouth. The big burly chieftain dude stared at them ferociously, giving them immense vibes of bombastic side-eye, particularly at our hero, demanding to know if it was him. Of course, our hero denied it, as he had said nothing, so he immediately shouted an "Oh!" at the top of his lungs. The chieftain and the hero both looked at the braided man, who seemed equally confused. The chieftain claimed it was the braided man who spoke, and before he could finish his sentence, being in the game Dungeon in Stone, the chieftain swung his axe, cutting the man down in one fell swoop. Blood splattered all over as his head was separated from his body, even reaching our hero, increasing the panic within him. Imagine if school teachers had this power when students talked in their classes. Oof. He couldn't believe a real human being was cut down in front of him. Still, he had to maintain composure, as the chieftain could kill him too if he showed any emotion. The chieftain explained that the man who was supposed to be Kajua's son Orm had been possessed by an evil spirit, while instructing everyone to forget what they heard from their memories and to continue the coming-of-age ceremony. Our hero had a revelation. The first was that anyone who spawns into the game is considered an evil spirit. The second was that if anyone finds out that you were an evil spirit, it meant that you would die. The third thing was that it could have been his head that was rolling on the ground. The conclusion was that he realized he needed to get through the game without being found out by anyone. But there was a small problem. He didn't know his name, and the chieftain was calling people exclusively by their names. One by one the barbarians continued to step forward as the chieftain called out their names. Panic and fear started to overtake our man as he cursed the game for not giving him his name, leaving him to guess it, a matter of life and death. Our man finally thought of an idea which had a low possibility but was the only way he had right now. Gripping his hands tightly out of nervousness, his plan was to wait 2 seconds after a name has been called, but the name might belong to some other evil spirit's name, so he decided to just leave it to luck. Soon enough the chieftain yells out for Jandel's son called Bjorn. Our man started the countdown the moment the name was called. He waited as no one else stepped forward. 2 seconds since the name had been called, no one had stepped up. With a confident step forward, our Giga Chad decided that the name was his. Maybe. Comment below what you would do if you were in the same situation as our man. The old chieftain calls out the name, Bjorn. Our Giga Chad of a man, who we will now call Bjorn, steps out and stands in front of the chieftain, making strong bromance eye contact. They have the ultimate bromance staring competition of sorts as the chieftain's glowing yellow eyes meet our hero's brown eyes. The romantic tension can be felt in the aura around the two hulking figures. Suddenly, the chieftain tells Bjorn to pick a weapon with a gleeful expression. Bingo! Bjorn exclaimed in his mind as hearing those words from the chieftain calms Bjorn down because he had gotten his name right. He's glad that he has found a name for himself in this threatening world as Jandel's son Bjorn. Now he had to make a second decision that was highly important, picking a weapon. Because barbarians don't have any talent in magic, they must rely on their strong physicality. Bjorn's game plan was to raise his character as a close-quarters brawler, nothing manlier than hand-to-hand combat, am I right guys? So he decided to go for a weapon that fits that particular playstyle well, and he began to reach for the weapon. The chieftain looked at him with a bombastic side eye, questioning his decision. You see, our protagonist has picked out a shield of all things. He knows that this might be the best decision he's made so far since he has 9 years' worth of experience playing the game and choosing a weapon. He has now been proclaimed a warrior by the chieftain, and a notification window pops up, stating that the synchronization has completed. We once again see the empty room with a computer screen on which Bjorn used to game. On a closer look on the monitor, it states Thade's got an overall item level of 24+. And his character information along with a daily log has been updated and transmitted to the administrator. Then we see a stat window, which tells us a little bit more about him. He might be level 1, but he's got a high physical, mental, and item level, not to mention he's got 67 points in combat index. Now that everything's settled, let's get a bit into the background of the Barbarian class. When Doran first played this class, he chose the greatsword as his weapon because he thought that it looked cool. However, that led to him dying many times in many different brutal ways to different demonic creatures like in Elden Ring. He would get quite frustrated with his inability to survive in the game and would wonder how to maximize a build with survivability as a focus. He experimented with a bunch of different weapons, from the dual axe and large hammer to the flail. He had tried different weapons and tested all of them as it was all within the Berserker meta. He realized that the Berserker builds were not meant for survival. He would barely make it after a fight in the game, bruised and bloody, and always had little survivability. However, one day, while wandering through a town in the game, his eyes fell on a shield, and he had an epiphany. Why couldn't he play the Barbarian class as something other than a damage dealer? I mean, they are a class with high vitality and strength stats, and despite not being as good at taking damage as a dwarf, this class can take major hits and survive because it possessed the base for a tanker. He used to be unsure of this particular build because it would be a bit too difficult to learn and master. However, Bjorn did not want to waste all of his time and effort researching, so he decided to go with it anyways. As the scene switches to an explosion inside of a dungeon, this is where we learn the power of this build. We see the corpse of a humongous bird with its face beaten into a bloody pulp, with our hero Bjorn holding his shield and hammer. He had cleared one of the toughest bosses with this build, and that's where he knew that this build is extremely overpowered. So, going into this horrifying nightmare that had become a reality, our hero was confident that he made the best decision he could, and he will not come to regret it. Open up the gates, the chieftain yells at the workers within the large barbarian stronghold. The gate begins to slowly rise as the young warriors look towards it. This gate led to their first initial test. You see, every barbarian that comes of age must go through this labyrinthian maze, and our hero is a bit nervous knowing the horrors that await them. That is the only path to the city. As the gates begin to open, so does the nervousness in Bjorn. The gates are opening, and the chief is excited. He screams the name Rathtonia as he ushers the young warriors to depart. He screams at the top of his lungs, telling them that their fates lie in that place. The crowd surges with energy and excitement. We see these men and women, all with equal power in the urge to fight. They run straight ahead towards the gates with total determination, and our hero Bjorn is one of them. He's running along with them for the time being, but he's more focused on surviving rather than just being a dumb brute like the others. However, while following them, a question begins to eat at him, and he wonders if they even know where they are going. After a while of running around, they all come to a halt. One of the men with a mullet and brawny figure commands the others. He tells them that they might have lost their way. The crowd is not happy about this, screaming and blaming the young leader, saying that Venom's third son, Carrick, has led them the wrong way, and he's not fit to lead them. During this commotion, our hero Bjorn begins to acknowledge the absolute dumb mind of these barbarians. He knows that no one would have done any better even if they were in the leading position in that moment. Carrick admits that he's not fit to lead and steps down, and a blonde woman with long hair and a muscular body takes his place. She states that she will be the one to lead them all from here. This woman's name was Einar, the second daughter of Fenelines, and the crowd obviously agrees with this decision as they consider her a wise warrior. She smiles intriguingly as she looks towards the crowd, but our hero Bjorn is not convinced. Turns out he was right because she quickly claims that she's lost too, and the crowd loses it again. The crowd was losing its mind, yelling at each other and talking about how they had to reach the labyrinth within a given time. They start nominating one another to lead without actually thinking too much about it while panicking and yelling around, after telling Einar that she doesn't deserve to lead, which causes her to be depressed in the background. Meanwhile, Bjorn is just standing there as a spectator, wondering if these idiots have any idea how brainless they look. He wants to reach the labyrinth in time, but he doesn't want to attract attention to himself, so he comes up with a plan. He approaches Einar, and she acknowledges him with a sad face but wonders if he's there to bully her as well. He tells her that's not the case, but he wishes to tell her the way to the labyrinth. Einar is shocked, her eyes are wide open, as she wonders how. He then points towards a group of adventurers with different classes and tells her to simply follow all of them. Those same adventurers are looking towards the barbarians with disdain, calling them savage and questioning their intelligence. Einar understands and says she'll try his idea. She heads back to the barbarians and tells them that she's figured out the way to the labyrinth, and the brainless idiots begin to praise her again as Bjorn looks at them with disappointment. They begin to travel once again, and they eventually reach the labyrinth. It's a large purple portal, makes you wonder how all the barbarians couldn't spot something as bright and huge as that in the city. The crowd is ecstatic while looking at it, calling it the sacred dimension of battle. Bjorn looks at the labyrinth in disbelief and begins to question whether entering it right now is the right choice or not. He wonders if anyone would notice if he chooses to walk away from the group right now. He knows that he's never had any experience fighting in real life, and he had been hospitalized for most of his life too. He's sweating nervously while calculating if he would even be able to fight a single monster in the labyrinth. He thinks if there are other ways to pay the taxes of Rathtonia other than going into the labyrinth. That's when he remembered the tax of Rathtonia, which was one of the most wicked systems in the game of Dungeon and Stone. Every citizen in Rathtonia needs to pay taxes from 20 years old, and if they don't, it's an instant execution. Of course, there are a lot of ways to make money in the game, but the most common is to head into the labyrinth and fight monsters. There are also a few other common ones, such as working in places like the village bars. However, he's a barbarian, so he's automatically looked down upon by the rest of Rathtonia. He cannot find work where his safety is guaranteed. Barbarians simply aren't allowed to do any sort of normal work, so they are forced to fight. That's why they're the only class that gets a free weapon at the start. Bjorn doesn't want to go into the labyrinth, he's unsure of his abilities. A voice shouts out that there was only 10 minutes left until the entrance closes, but the biggest problem was that it opens up only once a month, so if he doesn't enter now, he would have to suffer in silence for a month and somehow survive without any money. Panic begins to set in our hero as Bjorn analyzes his situation and wonders how he would ever survive if he didn't go into the labyrinth right this minute. He wishes to go into the labyrinth, but his feet just wouldn't move, and his body won't listen to him. Suddenly, he hears his name being called out by a sweet voice, and a hand places itself on his shoulder. It's Einar, and she looks at the protagonist with a concerned expression. She tells him that the other warriors have already entered, and that they must enter too as they do not have much time left. The portal grows smaller as less and less time remains until it closes, only 5 minutes remaining according to a man chanting. Bjorn is still in limbo as he tells Einar to go in first and that he would follow her. She takes her first step towards the portal and halts, looking back at Bjorn. She thanks him for his help. He tells her that she doesn't need to thank him. She turns around and asks him how she could become wise like him. She tells him she's never seen a barbarian as smart as him before, and that she wishes to be like him. He is furious internally and thought that she needed to be reborn again, but just decides to give a vague answer. He tells her that she must always think before she acts. At this, she sparks a beautiful smile and thanks him for the advice. She promises to repay him for his help if she returns from the labyrinth. He realizes that she doesn't fear death and notices that barbarians are the same fearless creatures in real life as they were in the game. He asks her with a serious look on his face if she is afraid of death, wondering what her answer would be. Einar looks back at him slightly, thinking before speaking. She tells him that it's natural because the fear of death is within everyone. She continues by telling him that she is definitely afraid of dying, but she was born as a warrior. If she didn't fight, she would die, and that leaves an expression of surprise on Bjorn's face. He acknowledges that the barbarians aren't much different from himself. They simply have no choice but to fight. If they don't kill monsters, they won't survive the highly taxing Rathtonia. Einar begins to walk away and tells him that they should survive and meet again. Bjorn is completely in awe of her, along with the entirety of the barbarian race and their resilience. He too is a barbarian, though, and as he lifts his shield up, the realization becomes a fact. With only 1 minute left until the portal closes, he begins to rush down towards the gate. Bjorn might be morbidly terrified but had a smile on his face, as he knows that he simply has no choice but to do it. As he sprints down towards the labyrinth gate, he thinks about his powers, his strong barbarian physique, and his knowledge of everything about this game after raising thousands of characters. He rushes towards the gate with the determination that he will indeed survive this place. A notification window pops up, stating that he has entered the level 1 crystal cave. There's barely any light as a drop of water falls to the ground in the dark. He looks around, confusion being prominently plastered on his face. He speaks out loud to the emptiness of this dark cave and yells out, "Where am I?" This episode begins on a somber note as our hero, Bjorn, indulges in introspection, reminiscing about his days as a skilled dungeon and stone player. The memories of his past confidence flood his mind. He used to believe that his incredibly powerful barbarian body, combined with years of game knowledge and experience, could conquer anything the game had to offer. But now, those confident thoughts seem like distant memories, shattered by the unforgiving reality of the world he's trapped in. The scene shifts back to Bjorn, who finds himself once again in the dark and eerie dungeon known as the labyrinth. The darkness is almost suffocating, engulfing him in an oppressive veil of obscurity. He knows the first levels of the labyrinth usually have crystals providing illumination, but this part is different. It's filled with impenetrable darkness that chills him to the bone. Bjorn wonders if he's stumbled into the dreaded darkness region, a place on the furthest outskirts of the labyrinth where no light exists. The revelation stuns him, and he can't help but feel a sense of dread creeping into his heart. He realizes that this region isn't a starting point like the others. The rules are much different here, and survival will be far more challenging. With a heavy heart, Bjorn tries to gain some guidance from the game by calling the status window out, but the lack of response from the status window leaves him frustrated and disappointed. He's greeted by nothing but an eerie silence from the game, offering no help or solace. At this point, our hero's frustration reaches a boiling point. An expression of annoyance overtakes his face, but he quickly composes himself. He knows there's no point in staying in one place. He must keep moving if he wants to survive. With newfound determination, he puts his hand on the wall and starts moving slowly, trusting the cold stone to guide him. As he carefully advances through the treacherous darkness, he suddenly feels a searing pain shoot up from his foot. A gut-wrenching scream of agony escapes his lips, echoing through the dark abyss. His foot is caught in a vicious goblin trap, causing grave injuries with spikes piercing his skin. A window appears stating that his character has stepped into a goblin trap. Enduring the pain, he clenches his teeth, muttering to himself a mental pep talk that he must calm down and endure. He knows that making too much noise will alert nearby goblins that use his traps on level 1, and they'll come for him, eager to prey on the vulnerable intruder. Drawing upon his experience as a seasoned dungeon explorer, Bjorn tries to break free from the trap by softly hammering it with his shield. The orange glow of his eyes reflects his determination and anxiety as he looks around, checking his surroundings for any sign of goblin presence. He wonders if it's possible that the goblin is not near him, but a sudden jolt of realization dispels such thoughts. His mind quickly reminds him that thoughts like this are dangerous, and in this unforgiving realm, he must always assume the worst to ensure his survival. He knows better than to underestimate the cunning of these creatures. If there's a trap, there must be a goblin nearby, lurking in the shadows, watching his every move. If the goblin hears his scream and becomes aware of his presence, it might not attack right away, but it will watch him, stalking him like a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when he's at his weakest. This knowledge fuels Bjorn's determination to escape from the trap and evade the lurking goblin. He endures the pain of pulling the sharp pincers of the trap from his foot while cursing the barbarians for not providing them with leather boots. With every ounce of willpower and strength, he frees his foot from the goblin trap. Despite the victory, his troubles aren't over. The poison from the trap is spreading through his leg, numbing his right foot. The goblin is likely waiting for him, eager to prey on the wounded intruder. Despite the mounting fear and pain, Bjorn refuses to succumb to despair. He holds his shield up and asks the goblin to come out of hiding, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance as he tells the goblin to come out. But the paralyzing effect of the poison starts to take its toll, and he feels his leg weakening. As the poison begins to paralyze him, Bjorn finds himself saying idiotic things, talking to the goblin as if it was near him, while also realizing that his brain has been momentarily blanked out. Amidst the haze of pain and fear, he hears footsteps behind him, growing louder with every passing moment. He knows the goblin is getting closer, but he can't see it in the darkness. He decides to rely on the art of running away. Every time he moves a little bit, he senses the goblin's footsteps right behind him. He quickly turns around, trying to catch a glimpse of the lurking creature, but every time he does, he sees nothing but pitch darkness. However, despite the darkness shrouding his surroundings, Bjorn has an awareness about this game unlike anyone else. He knows the cunning and intelligence of his enemies. He knew that the goblin was maintaining a certain distance as it stops when he stops. It's rejoicing as its prey is bleeding away and dying. The goblin was probably waiting for him to slowly die while being scared of its laugh, and so he comes up with another plan on the spot. Instead of moving further away from the goblin and tearing himself out of its reach, he decides to kneel on the ground and then fall down face first. He pretends to collapse, hoping the goblin will believe the poison has finally worked its magic and taken him down. The goblin appears behind our hero, its grotesque features illuminated by the faint glow of Bjorn's eyes. It stares at his injured and bloody foot, seemingly in disbelief that the poison worked so fast. It moves closer, curiosity getting the better of it. But then, just as it's about to reach out to the seemingly lifeless intruder, it suddenly stops. A spark of suspicion flickers in its beady eyes, and it decides to throw a rock at Bjorn, just to be sure. Seeing the goblin throw rocks at him to verify if he's alive, Bjorn is actually amused, remembering how intelligent the enemies in this game can be. Determined not to move a muscle, he endures the stinging pain of the rocks hitting his body. The goblin, seemingly convinced of his demise, starts to move towards him, its axe raised in triumph. But Bjorn is not one to give up easily. As the goblin waddles closer, his axe at the ready, Bjorn sees this as his opportunity to strike. With a burst of energy, he quickly gets onto his knees and tries lunging at the goblin in an effort to attack it. However, the creature is too smart, and it realizes his plans as soon as he speaks. It swiftly dodges the oncoming attack, and the sinister smile on its face widens with triumph. Bjorn's heart pounds in his chest, but amidst the adrenaline and fear, he feels something stirring deep within him. An electrifying sense of power surges through his body, and he can feel his limbs moving with a will of their own. His hand automatically reaches out towards the creature, and his eyes are glowing red like a true barbarian, filled with the primal fury of a warrior. In one powerful punch, Bjorn manages to pummel the goblin onto the ground, shouting at it that he was stronger, and that the goblin was the prey instead. Oh, how the tables have turned. He unleashes a torrent of punches, each blow fueled by his frustration, fear, and the desire to prove his strength. The goblin cries out in pain, its wailing echoing in the darkness. Bjorn yells at the top of his lungs, proclaiming his dominance over the creature. With each punch, he can feel the rage and pent-up emotions from his past coming to the surface, driving him to fight with the fury of a wounded beast. As the goblin keeps letting out screams of pain, Bjorn feels something inside him shift. He feels the strength coursing through his veins, and the fear that once paralyzed him starts to recede. He realizes how different this body is compared to his past self, that sick little boy who was stuck in the hospital, frail and helpless. The realization empowers him, and his punches become more and more explosive. He delivers blow after blow, each one a testament to his newfound strength and resilience. He continues to destroy the goblin, declaring that he's not the prey in this scenario, but the predator. His screams of power reverberate through the darkness, and it's as if he's tapping into an ancient primal force, channeling the essence of a true barbarian fighter. With every punch, the goblin's body bears the brunt of Bjorn's overwhelming strength. Its bones crack, its body contorts, and it can't withstand the relentless assault. After crying out in pain for as long as it could, the goblin finally succumbs to the merciless onslaught. As the lifeless goblin lies before him just as a window appears telling him that he had defeated a goblin and earned 1 EXP, Bjorn continues to kneel, covered in sweat and goblin blood. He looks down at the disfigured and broken creature, witnessing the aftermath of his fury. The goblin's body begins to emanate smoke and light, just like in the game, as it starts to disintegrate. For a moment, Bjorn is taken aback, watching the creature's body fade away into nothingness, but soon, he notices something left behind on the ground, the red gemstone. He picks it up, realizing that this is the currency of the game. He inspects the little red gemstone in his hand. It's a grade 9 magic crystal with an estimated value of 1 piece of bread. The reward seems meager, considering the pain and suffering he endured. Wearing a sad smile on his face, Bjorn realizes that this world is not fair. It's a realm where labyrinths and monsters exist, and the monsters that die and disappear leave items behind. It's a world where the law of the jungle prevails, and survival demands strength, cunning, and resilience. Outside the confines of these labyrinthian dungeons, there are beautiful scenic views and diverse races living together in harmony. As he uses all of his strength to get up, the pain from his injured foot and the poison coursing through his leg are still a burden. But Bjorn knows that this isn't just a game, it's his new reality. He knows with the utmost certainty that he will never mistake this reality for a game ever again. This is his new life, and he's determined to face it head-on. With a renewed sense of purpose, Bjorn starts walking, his foot injured in poison, leaving behind a trail of blood. Every step he takes is marked with resilience, for he knows that in this realm, survival demands unwavering strength and resolve. The journey ahead may be arduous, but Bjorn is prepared to face whatever challenges come his way, for he is no longer a mere player in a game. He is a true warrior in a world of labyrinthine mysteries and unfathomable dangers. You are still bleeding. The window status repeats. A trail of blood follows as we now see him crawl his way through the darkness region as his foot has gotten purple due to blood loss and poison. He can be heard panting and groaning in pain as he crawls. He's getting a bit annoyed at the notification that he's still bleeding. He says he's not a fractured dog that needs reminders of it again and again. He remembers how sweet it felt to forsake his human weakness and embrace his barbaric side when killing that goblin. He's smart though as he's crawling without using his injured leg, which means he's not in pain, and he's also moving faster than he would have if he walks. Not to mention the best part is that he won't be stepping on any other traps. He will crawl his way while making sure the path is clear as he's crawling. His arm raises another trap, and he realizes that moving like this is making the rest of his body hurt pretty badly. But he must endure to survive this. His foot bleeding has not stopped since he got caught in the trap. It's gone numb and it looks almost deformed in its swollen state. At this point, our hero realizes that he might need some help because he is in quite a tricky situation. He cannot get any help in the darkness region though, so he must keep trekking on in one direction until he is able to get out of the darkness. During a pain that no one should ever go through, Bjorn wonders what happened to that other player from earlier, the one that was struck down by the chieftain. Did he ever wake up in his original body back in the normal world, or did he just simply die never to return? As the game keeps reminding him that he's bleeding, he begins to understand why humans have religions. In fact, he has bled so much at this point that he's only got 5% of his vitality remaining. He thinks about how in moments of despair, religion can provide humans with a distraction. It might have helped someone like him in a situation like this, but he's never been one to have immense faith. The window tells him that if he does not receive treatment soon the character may die. He crawls his way forward and reaches an area where he can see it getting brighter. Looks like he's doing much better than he had anticipated. As it's starting to get brighter, he must get to a lighter area, some place where he can see how much damage has been done to him. He crawls with all his remaining strength, doing his best to endure and survive. The problem is, our hero needs to be treated, and he wonders if there's anyone who would be able to help. However, before the thought even processes in his mind, his overly conscious side reminds him of how stupid he sounds. It tells him that he won't receive any help. Nobody likes barbarians. They're disproportional, stronger than the average person but have no other notable traits such as beauty or intelligence. For a moment, he thinks that he might be losing his sanity because now he's starting to see illusions. But as a mockery to himself, he asks his shadow what he would do instead. The shadow continues to scare him more, telling him that he might run into a monster before he runs into a human. However, Bjorn isn't fazed by this. He just wants to have better vision than this crippling darkness. His identity keeps splitting into two pieces, joining back again and getting dull again. He's having conversations with himself, and this is all because he's been losing way too much blood at a rapid rate. However, his shadow isn't giving him any opportunities. The more he thinks about surviving, the more it tells him that he's going to die as a loser. It tells him to give up, but he won't compromise on his life. He keeps crawling, trying his hardest to reach the light until he sees it, and he seizes it. As soon as he enters the light, he tries to speak out and call for help towards whoever is nearby. With only 4% vitality left, he will die soon if left unattended. A group of adventurers is passing by through the crystal-lit caves. A red-haired man in shining armor notices him and is shocked to see the barbarian in such a state. The red-haired man in iron armor lets his friend Drouse know that there's a dying barbarian, and the friend is also shocked. Meanwhile, Bjorn's notification from reaching 4% remaining of the character's vitality had dropped to 2% as he continued to bleed. However, reaching 2% vitality gives him an achievement. His mental stat will keep rising by +1 now as a reward. The adventurers walk down towards our barbarian hero and talk about how he looks like a novice. Listening to this, Bjorn internally curses at them and begs them to help him in his mind. This is a seemingly well-balanced party of 5 adventurers, a old mage like Gandalf, a priestess, a stunning rogue with arrows, and 2 warriors. The blonde-haired warrior Drouse wonders how a novice got here faster than them as his group mentions that Bjorn was suspicious. At this moment, Bjorn is so weak that he can't even form words with his mouth to reply. The adventurers are just staring at him, and he wants to rage in anger because no one is doing anything to help him. All he could do was give them a huge bombastic side-eye. Drouse stands up and keeps staring at Bjorn for a moment before sparking a creepy smile. He then talks to the priestess named Erzina behind him and asks if she could treat the barbarian. Bjorn is a bit surprised and happy to know that there's a priestess in their party, but just as he thought he would run into a miracle, the priestess coldly refused to heal him. Son of a bitch, right guys? Now that might come as a shock to most people, but Drouse has another idea up his sleeve. He talks to his red-haired man in armor called Patron and asks him to give him one of the potions that he has. Patron tries to get out of it, saying that it's only for use in emergencies when they cannot be treated by divine power. Drouse won't take no for an answer though and tells him that he would pay him for it once they were outside. Patron isn't too happy about this, but he has no choice but to give the potion over to the party leader. Drouse takes the potion and warns our hero that since this isn't divine power that's healing him, it might hurt quite a bit. He unseals the vial of the healing potion and spills it all over Bjorn's foot. A notification window pops up that lets our hero know that his vitality is quickly increasing due to recovery. His eyes open wide as he feels a huge sting on his foot and all over his body. He screams out in agony as it hurts horribly. The pain is so much that it feels even worse than when he got caught in the goblin trap. His entire body feels like it's melting, and now he knows why they never allowed players to use the potion in the middle of battles. The vial is empty, with only a few droplets that drip out onto the ground, and miraculously, Bjorn's foot has completely healed from all its purple bleeding and swollen grotesque nature to its regular ordinary look. He begins to get up, breathing a sigh of relief, knowing that he has finally been healed. He really thought he was going to die as he sweats profusely out of nervousness, but his eyes have a determination like never before. Now that Bjorn is awake and fully conscious, Drouse asks him to tell them how a novice like him managed to get to this part of the labyrinth before them. He inquires if he knows anything about secret passages and that he would indeed purchase that information from Bjorn. He thinks that they could make a valuable transaction out of this encounter, and Bjorn now knows this. He knows it's for the best because there is nothing more suspicious than human decency in a game like this. People will always have an ulterior motive in Dungeon and Stone. Never trust strangers, people. He answers exactly how it happened. He tells them how as soon as he stepped into the labyrinth, he was here. This confuses Drouse a bit, but he has read about this before. He talks about how dimensional instability could result in a player falling into the outskirts of the darkness at times. However, since the probability was so low, it happened only once every 100 years. Bjorn is mortified after hearing that this happens once after every 100 years. This information was completely new for him. Plot armor kinda failed here for him. Bjorn once again notices that they have a mage and a priestess in their party, which means that they are at least mid to high level at this point. But somehow, Bjorn had just experienced something on his first trip to the labyrinth which was something even a veteran party like theirs had never seen before. Drouse thanks him for the interesting story as the group of adventurers begins to walk in a different direction. He looks back at our hero, telling him that he can leave and that he doesn't have to pay them back for the potion. Bjorn looks at them as they walk away. Time in the labyrinth is considered as precious as gold, so it was a miracle that these people decided to waste their time on someone like him. He musters up his energy and picks up his shield as he stands up, though he feels disgusted that he is someone who needs to be shown such pity. The scene switches to the party of adventurers that we saw a second ago as they walk through the crystal-lit caverns of the labyrinth. Patron talks to Drouse, telling him that the barbarian was quite lucky that they ran into him. However, Drouse comments that spawning into the darkness region on his first time is quite unlucky. Patron corrects Strauss by telling him that Bjorn was lucky to have met them because if he were to stepped on a goblin trap on the first floor he would have died eventually. If anything, the rogue woman in their party says that the barbarian survived because he ran into Strauss. After all, a certain someone wouldn't even give him a potion. Patron says that it's because there are too many cheap people like him around and asks the priestess if she agrees with him. The priestess is quite stoic, though, as she does not even respond to the question. She just quietly keeps on walking. This angers the rogue. She begins to insult Patron, saying that if it wasn't for the temple restrictions, the priestess would have healed the barbarian. But Patron isn't budging. He just says there are too many two-faced people. The rogue tells him to learn a few things from Strauss, and he simply replies that Strauss helped him because he wanted to gain some information about a secret passage. Strauss is listening to all of this and makes an embarrassed face because he doesn't know how to respond. He then notices the blood trail on the ground and wonders when this barbarian's blood trail is going to stop. They've been following it for a while, and it just never ends. The rogue says that judging from the barbarian's strong mentality, it seems that he didn't survive just because of luck. Patron states that it's bound to end somewhere. Strauss tells his party about a shortcut and asks them to make a turn right here, and the priestess comments that it's helpful to have a capable guide in the party. The rogue tells her that their party leader has the map of the entire first floor memorized, which is even more surprising to the priestess. This is where Strauss notices something that catches his attention: a large stone gate, and he notices that they're the first ones to arrive at this location. Strauss puts his hand on the stone tablet near him, and a bright gate emerges in front of them. You see, this is the portal that will take them to the second floor, and naturally, they're all excited and ready to go. Before they leave, though, the rogue catches something. The rest of the group turns around to see what she noticed. She tells them that it's the goblin trap with Bjorn's sandal covered in blood. The mage summons a light bulb, illuminating the whole area, and tells her that she was right, and they see the blood trail that is emerging from the trap towards the place they found him. This shocks every single member of the party, confused at how someone could survive for that long while bleeding profusely. Shows how much our boy Bjorn is an absolute gigachat of a man. The mage asks Strauss how much they have traveled since encountering the barbarian, and Strauss replies that it has been roughly 15 kilometers. The mage is impressed, calling him a monstrous bastard for crawling through the darkness for that long. Patron is shocked too, stating that the barbarian was out of his mind. The rogue grew nervous upon hearing that from him. We see that he's internally quite scared, wondering how he would have done in the same situation. He remembers how Bjorn held out his right hand the entire time, which probably had the goblin's crystal inside it. He realizes that even after crawling that entire time and almost dying in the process, the barbarian didn't forget to offer his only tradable item in exchange for their help. He takes back everything he said earlier. In fact, he asks Strauss for the barbarian's name. He's starting to realize how wrong he was about that person. Lunatics like Bjorn will never die unless there's a special reason. No matter how hard things are or how much agony they must face, death will never be their escape route. A notification pops up, letting Bjorn know that he has defeated a goblin. This happens after his near-death experience in the darkness region. Our hero kept smashing goblin skulls, absolutely destroying them, yet, he kept running into them. They kept on coming. As Bjorn was covered in goblin blood, he was nervous, but that nervousness quickly ended when he realized goblins were no threat when he could see them. There were traps randomly placed on the ground, but they weren't even covered with dirt or anything. They were visible to the naked eye. The goblin jumps up from behind our hero with a scream, but the ambushes were predictable as their hiding places were too obvious. He kept bashing them away with his shield each time they tried to attack, asking them where they thought they were going as they spilled blood everywhere. However, there was one problem: Bjorn was starving, and it showed on his face. He turns around as he remembered that the deputy chief of the barbarians had given him some food. As he checked the small red bag hanging on his belt, he looked at it and saw a large hole in it. It seemed like all was lost. He looked at the bag with a shocked expression, realizing that this happened due to him crawling on the ground. As he chowed down on the loaf of bread he had, he realized that out of 7 days' worth of rations, 5 were gone. He was mortified, and now he had to eat as little as possible to survive. He wondered why the crusty bread, drier than sand, could taste so sweet and delicious when his saliva melts it. As soon as he finished eating that one piece, though, he began getting thirsty. In a cave surrounded by glowing crystals and nothing else, he wondered where he could get water, dungeon and stone. Wasn't a regular game. This game had a hunger system like in Minecraft. It was somewhat like a survival game where you had to constantly keep your hunger and thirst meters in check. This mechanic only activates during the labyrinth, but he never felt the need to carry water around. But this wasn't a game anymore, and he was in it for real. The game was already too difficult, and now that it became a reality, it just got worse. Instead of calling it a game, it's more appropriate to think that he has transmigrated into a different world. A thought wanders through his mind. If the deputy chief didn't give him any water, there must be a supply of it in the labyrinth. As soon as he thought about it, he heard water drops. This is also the exact moment in which he ran into another person, a young knight sitting on the floor of the cave next to his backpack. This was Bjorn's first encounter since that party of adventurers. The two looked at each other but did not speak a word. Neither of them spoke to each other, as if it was an unspoken rule to not interact with other adventurers unless absolutely necessary. The scene shifts as our hero is sitting on the ground, counting the amount of red gemstones he had acquired. He seemingly acquired 44 of them, and he was impressed with himself for capturing that many since he was just on the verge of death before. However, he was now extremely tired since he hunted so many goblins. His exhaustion condemned him to sleep as he lets out a massive yawn. Yet, the rules aren't this simple because there are two ways to sleep in the labyrinth. The first method is to leave everything up to God and just go to sleep, hoping everything you collected isn't stolen when you wake up. But there is a second method, which is to find allies who protect each other along with your loot. Since Bjorn was a barbarian, barely anybody wanted to be in a party with him. They would all apologize and run away, saying they had all the necessary members for a party. This happened several times, with each person telling him their party is full or showing disgust towards him being a barbarian. He knew he was a barbarian, but to think he was rejected affected by every single adventurer, that was a different kind of disappointment. He was frustrated, and the look of anger took over his face as he calls them mother furs. He didn't want to join their party permanently, he just wanted allies so he could go to sleep overnight. But just as he thought all hope was lost, he heard someone call out to him. When he looked behind, there was a handsome young man holding a giant hammer upside down, wearing a huge backpack. He asked Bjorn if he was looking for an overnight companion. Bjorn was still frustrated at this point and asked the guy what he said, while wondering who he even is. The guy then assumes that he isn't looking for an overnight companion and states that he just wanted to sleep, and Bjorn seemed like a reasonable barbarian. Bjorn's expression quickly changed as he realized that this guy wanted exactly the same thing as he did. He quickly tells him that he also was looking for an overnight companion. The guy introduces himself as Hans. He extends his hand, and asks Bjorn to stay with him for the time being as allies. Our hero introduces himself as well, stating that he is Bjorn, son of Jandal. The two men shake hands with a romantic feeling, and Hans says that he will just call him Bjorn. As they held each other's hand with a bromance feeling, Hans says that it was best to have 3 overnight companions, but it seemed like a waste of time to look for a third member. He says they can spend the night together with a heavily blushed face, but it comes across a bit too romantic for our Giga Chad man. This creeps our hero out, and he wonders if this sounds perverted due to the way this guy speaks. Bjorn pulls his hand away quickly. Hans suggests doing rock paper scissors to decide who sleeps first, and that was how they decided to spend their first night together in the labyrinth. After the rock paper scissors session, Han wins and asks Bjorn if he can sleep first. Bjorn reluctantly agrees. He already knew he was going to lose since he has no luck points. Hans gives a pocket watch to our hero and tells him to wake him when the shorthand reaches 2. Assuming the barbarian doesn't know how to check the time, Han asks Bjorn if he needed to explain the watch thing again, but Bjorn tells him that he understands. He looks at the pocket watch, which looked expensive, but thought that this was how most people would look at barbarians in Dungeon and Stone, which made he feel like poop. But Bjorn was sure that he could use this to his advantage at a later time. Some time had passed as Hans is seen comfortably snoring away. Bjorn looks at him and wonders if this was what an experienced adventurer was like. He continues to look at Hans sleep and wonders if he would share his sleeping bag if Bjorn asks for it. At this point, he's starting to get a little bored because there's nothing to do. He keeps looking at the watch and wishing that time would pass so he can go to sleep as well. After a while, the shorthand strikes 2, and Bjorn wakes the sleepy Han up. It's time for him to be on watch. Han wakes up yawning and asks if anything happened, to which Bjorn says no. Hans thanks him for being on watch and tells him to get some sleep so he can wake him up in 2 hours. While Bjorn initially agrees, his intrusive thoughts tell him not to. Hans was sitting there looking at the watch, glad that the barbarian didn't break it. Meanwhile, our hero kept wondering how he could trust someone he just met. He lays down and pretends to go to sleep, snoring very loudly. He acts like a savage who has had a long day, hoping that Hans doesn't notice that he's awake. As he lays with one eye open, Hans is amused by the barbarian, finding him to be a funny species. Bjorn can more or less guess that people let their guard down around barbarians because they think barbarians are all stupid. He turns his back to Hans and keeps pretending that he's asleep, hoping that if Hans had any ulterior motives, he would make a move. However, time runs out faster than he can blink, and before he knows it, it's his turn to be on guard duty again. He did not sleep awake in those 2 hours. For 2 whole hours, our hero pretended to sleep, and yet nothing bad happened. Hans did nothing at all except watch over him. He's almost disappointed that Hans didn't try anything shady, and now he's regretting his choice to not go to sleep when he had the chance. Yet his mind somehow reminded him again and again that he couldn't let his guard down around a stranger until he knows for certain that he was worthy of his trust. His eyes were visibly weary as he felt like he would die from fatigue. He was forcing himself to stay awake, convincing himself not to fall asleep. Right as his eyes close, he hears his name being yelled out by Hans, and his eyes open wide so fast that he shook to the core. Hans puts his hand on his shoulder and greets him with a huge smile on his face. Meanwhile, Bjorn is staring at him completely confused. Bjorn tries to cover for himself, saying that he wasn't sleeping. However, Hans is a smart man. He simply tells him to wipe the drool off of his face first. Bjorn apologizes and wipes his mouth. Hans tells him that it's all good and thankfully nothing bad happened while Bjorn was sleeping. Bjorn is shocked for a second, unsure of what the deal is, but he calms down and thanks Hans, telling him that he can guard for longer if Hans wishes to sleep. Hans laughingly tells him that it's no bother and that Bjorn should go to sleep since he looks tired. It's his turn to guard, anyways. Bjorn looks at him with a somewhat suspicious expression and just thanks him. However, he looks back at this whole thing that just happened. Bjorn looks back at how compassionate this man looked initially and how he offered to be allies for the night. He thinks of how Hans spoke to him since our hero is in a tough situation and how he didn't even blame him for falling asleep. Moreover, when Bjorn offered to make up for his mistake of sleeping while on guard duty, Hans simply refused. As Bjorn lay on the floor, sleeping with one eye open, he remembered one key thing that he learned over years of playing Dungeon and Stone. Such a kind person does not exist anywhere in this game. Bjorn's eyes are open wide with this realization, and a look of pure shock covers his face as he realizes what is going on. Hans asks if he is up as he looks down at him with a creepy smile. Never trust a character that has his eyes closed when he smiles everyone. He then asks him why Bjorn hadn't slept more while holding a giant two-handed hammer on his head, ready to smash Bjorn's brains out on the cavern's floor as he lay on the ground. As the hammer is about to make contact with Bjorn's skull, his instincts kick in immediately as sleep is overtaken by adrenaline. He turns over to his side and quickly gets up, somehow dodging the powerful hammer strike that also had an element of surprise in its favor. He immediately picks up his shield and takes the position of a warrior. This completely shocks Hans, who hadn't expected him to dodge. He was now filled with dread. Bjorn looked absolutely terrifying. His face had a look of pure rage, while an aura of anger surrounded him. He knew he was right, and his instincts didn't fail him. Bjorn's eyes were glowing red with rage, his blood pumping so aggressively that his veins were visible on his face. Hans began trying to make excuses, saying he could explain, hoping he would be spared, but Bjorn just found this even more infuriating. Bjorn charges at the backstabber while he pleads for him to wait, but his excuses were not going to save him against this barbarian behemoth. Bjorn rushes at him and slams him across the face with his shield, sending the scrawny traitor flying into the air. Bjorn wondered if this opportunist really thought that barbarians are this stupid. While Hans's blood started to stain Bjorn's shield, Hans managed to stay on his feet as he was nimble enough to tank that first hit. He tried pleading again, telling Bjorn that he could explain everything if Bjorn would just calm down. Bjorn, on the other hand, was thinking that if he didn't die in one hit like the goblins, then he should just opt to strike him once more. Smash! Bjorn says as he once again slams Hans in the face with his shield, absolutely rearranging his face in that hit. Hans goes flying away and smashes into the ground. He quickly tries getting up, dragging his body as he coughed up blood, breathing aggressively as the relentless pain in his face was overtaking everything. Bjorn was there, looking at him crawl away like the rat he was. He walks over to Hans and stands over him, putting the literal fear of the game in him. Bjorn looked like the devil at this point. Hans continued to say sorry to Bjorn. Hans's face had a bruised chin, busted eye, broken teeth, and a destroyed cheek. He begged Bjorn not to kill him and to let him live. Bjorn asks him why he tried to kill him while he was asleep. Hans is on his knees at the mercy of our hero, and he tells him that it was for Bjorn's magic crystals. He swears that he was just going to knock Bjorn out and take all of the crystals. Bjorn asks him why he would try to kill a barbarian for a few magic crystals, knowing full well the risk and the huge punishment that occurs with killing other adventurers. However, Hans doesn't budge. He goes with the same story about how he wanted Bjorn's crystal shards, but now he also mentions that he wanted our hero's shield. He wanted the shield because it was a barbarian weapon made out of high-quality materials, which means that it sells for a good price. Bjorn pretends to play along and agrees with his point of view. This excites Hans, who starts to believe that Bjorn might let him go. However, Bjorn's foot quickly moves up to Hans's face as he knows that the traitor is still hiding something. The kick connects right on his face as a huge splatter of blood pours out of Hans's mouth while the betrayer can do nothing but scream out loud. Hans has fallen on the ground. Bjorn stomps his foot on his chest and gives him one last opportunity to come clean, be honest, and just spit out his clear motivations. You see, in Dungeon and Stone, it is a genuine crime to kill another adventurer. There either must be a huge reason, or you simply just don't kill anyone. So a few crystals and a shield were not going to be worth the risk for a scrawny pup like Hans. Your heart, Hans shouted as he held onto Bjorn's foot. This not only confuses Bjorn, it also shakes him to the core. Why would someone want to kill him for his heart? However, Hans dives more into detail. It turned out barbarian hearts are quite a popular commodity. People are purchasing them at steep prices. Hans tells Bjorn that the barbarian hearts are probably being used as ingredients for a new spell. Bjorn finally understands Hans's intent. To Hans, Bjorn was nothing but a mere goblin, tough to catch, but precious to yield, a big reward. Bjorn asks him why he only attacked him later instead of doing it the first time he was sleeping. Hans says that he needed to sleep too and that Bjorn's protection was his only option, which makes Bjorn realize that he's not too careful of a killer, just an effective pest. Hans thinks that he might get to live now that he told the Bjorn everything he wanted to know, so he asks him if he was willing to forgive him. Bjorn kept his foot on the backstabber's throat and contemplated what to do. Eventually, a smile takes over our hero's face, and he mocks the traitor's use of the word forgive. He tells Hans that he was probably going to run into more people like him, and wondered they will all do the same thing and then ask for forgiveness the same way. More and more terror takes over Hans's face. Bjorn looks straight into his soul, his eyes glowing red with bloodlust, his whole body covered in the blood of goblins, and he asks Hans a simple question. Forgive them every time? Hans immediately says no and tries to separate himself from those people. He pleads for his life as Bjorn raises his shield higher, seemingly to land one last killing blow. Hans keeps on pleading, telling Bjorn that he was going to give him everything he has, but Bjorn continued to hold his shield high and tight just as Hans pleads with him to give him one more chance, but Bjorn just closes his heart to it. Blood surrounds the area where Hans was laying, his body stops moving, and blood pools underneath it. It seems that only one day after entering the game, Bjorn had killed a man. A notification window pops up, giving our hero the knowledge that he had unlocked an achievement titled First Murder. His mental stat will now keep increasing by +1. He takes a lot of stuff off the dead guy, now equipping his shoulder pads which increase his overall item level by +13. Not to mention, he also equips Hans' backpack, which gives him more inventory space, and also takes Hans' leather boots, which increase his item level by +5. Finally, he equips a hammer that raises his overall item levels by +30. Our Giga Chad man was finally decked out in the latest fashion gear, ready for fights that were much tougher than what he had encountered so far. After this point, Bjorn was a different man. He had graduated from living like a savage. He had a water bottle to drink from when he got thirsty, a compass to help him figure out directions, a pocket watch when he wanted to know the time, and he was able to treat his injuries with bandages and potions. He found this quite ironic, though. You see, he didn't have these basic necessities before, and only after killing a man did he get to live like one himself. Bjorn headed back into the caverns, ready to hunt some more goblins. Right now, his overall combat index was quite high, and his mental stat was much higher than expected. Bjorn was smashing the goblins into dust with his hammer, as it only took one hit for them to completely disintegrate into nothing. He looked at his weapon and realized how strong the hammer was and wondered if he should have picked a melee weapon from the very beginning, but he brushes that thought away as he didn't know that he would get this good at fighting at the time. He then wonders if it was because he was in the body of a barbarian, as during the battles, it felt like he was using somebody else's body. Two goblins appeared in front of our hero, holding weapons and almost taunting him. Look at the size of those goblins compared to our boy Bjorn, RIP to those guys. It was the second day of the labyrinth, so the goblins would now appear in pairs. However, Bjorn was ready with his shield and hammer in hand. His battle stats had gone up thanks to his new weapon. Wanting to take him down, the goblins charged at our hero with a divine hunger in their eyes. but Bjorn was simply too strong for them at this point, and he smashed them away in one hit of his hammer and shield. Whether he used his hammer or his shield, it wasn't taking much effort to smash through their defenses. But right after killing the last goblin in sight for the moment, he comes to a halt and realizes something very important. He hasn't slept since the Hans incident, and pushing himself like this has the risk of dying from fatigue. Bjorn rests against a wall as he knows that despite not having an overnight companion, he might be better off without one. It's a higher chance of survival if he gets stabbed by goblins rather than other adventurers. As soon as he was about to sleep, he heard some goblin noises and woke up frustrated. It was another pair of goblins, and they would arrive every time he started dozing off. This annoys him, as he didn't even rest for 10 minutes. He raises his hammer at the creatures and grinds them to dust in a single blow. Bjorn puts his back up against the wall and tries to sleep while standing, as he thinks he has killed all goblins within his sight. He wishes for them to stop appearing, as he just needed a little sleep. As soon as he falls asleep, a notification window pops up, letting him know that he was attacked by a goblin while he slept. Bjorn's eyes open to a creepy-looking golem with its knife inserted into his chest. He did not sense a creature whatsoever. Another moment of delayed anger, and Bjorn simply sends the goblin to the shadow realm in one hit, shouting, "Asshole." The goblin goes flying, and its buddy is somewhat terrified to attack Bjorn after witnessing this. Bjorn yells, "Next," staring at the other goblin. The goblin looks back at him, shivering in fear, and drops to the ground. Instead of fighting, though, the creature just decides to cut the meeting short and run away. Bjorn looks at it as it runs away, as he didn't have the energy to chase after it. He then takes a look at the wound caused by the sneak attack. Bjorn is glad that he's not shorter, or if the goblin was able to jump higher, it would have stabbed him in the throat. He treats the wound using a red potion, thinking that he really needed to sleep as he couldn't sense the little golem guy from before. It hurts him a lot, even more than getting stabbed, but it works as the potion started to heal his wound. It had been 14 hours since he had killed Hans, and he knew that there must now be people looking for overnight companions. However, he's not going to be able to trust anyone for very long. Now that he knows the value of barbarian hearts, if it comes down to it, he can at least trust his back to a fellow barbarian. He roams the cave for about an hour, looking for an overnight companion. Meeting a pair of humans who asks him if he was looking for an overnight companion, he soon meets another group who asked the same thing, and another one who asks the same thing. Barbarians seem to be hot on the market now since yesterday they all hated him. Bjorn rejects all of their offers and tells them that he was looking for another barbarian. An adventurer tells Bjorn that it would be tough for him to meet another barbarian, which surprises him. The adventurer explains to Bjorn that since the barbarians had their coming-of-age ceremony, they would have ascended within 2 to 3 months, which meant there was probably less than 100 of them on the first floor. Bjorn agrees with the adventurer in his mind as he thought about how laughable it was for him to struggle on the first floor despite having such a large build. May Rathtonia protect you on your journey, the adventurer tells Bjorn as he leaves. Bjorn stood still for a moment, thinking that he had to give up on the thought of finding another barbarian. He decides to be realistic in choosing his overnight companion and decided that it had to be a non-human. Bjorn continues to wander around the area, thinking about elves who keep their promises, or dwarves who were spirited like barbarians would be the best, but something soon catches the corner of his eye. After making such a decision and roaming the cave for about an hour, he ran into a certain someone, a young elf girl with beautiful blonde hair and ember eyes. She was sitting alone, hunched into a corner in the cave. She immediately jolts up at the sight of Bjorn due to his handsomeness and awesome body. The game notified him that he had run into an injured elf. Bjorn immediately realized that he had found his overnight companion. The elf has a confused expression on her face as her piercing eyes glare at him. Waifu spotted? Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.